Fiction can teach us to live wisely. And I'm going to demonstrate that by reviewing two novels by the Christian author Ted Dekker. Hello, I'm William Isley, and welcome to Thinking Wisely with Dr. Isley, where we learn to live wisely by thinking wisely. Fiction can teach us to live wisely because a novel, for example, tells a story. And we live in a story, the story of our own lives, the lives of others that are around us. And in our surroundings, there's a narrative. And we tend to understand issues, challenges that we have to exercise wisdom with through a narrative, through a story. Now, you could say, well, can't we learn to think wisely and live wisely by reading autobiographies, biographies, and history? And that's true. However, fiction, good fiction, allows the creative artist some freedom to work with a narrative, read into the characters' minds in a way that brings these issues into a clarity of focus that perhaps we miss in the quick passing of our own time's life. Now, the question you might ask is, why? Why Ted Dekker? To explain that or to answer that, I need to tell you a little bit about myself. As many of you know, I am trained in theology and church history and have taught theology, Bible, and philosophy for many years. But I've always had a strong literary interest. For example, I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the author G.K. Chesterton. So that's why I had this interest in fiction. But this video really comes about from another reason. Many years ago, I witnessed an example of terrible suffering. Indeed, it seemed to be meaningless suffering. And it made me question, how can a good God allow for such a thing? And that created a quest in my mind, and eventually a story came out of that. And that's why I published my novel, uh, The Likeness of Sinful Flesh, which is a story about a young West Indian woman, ambitious, who wants to escape the confines of her small island. However, she comes from a dysfunctional family and she makes bad choices that get her involved in an abusive relationship, and she harms one that she dearly loves. And so she begins to question God's goodness in the light of her own life and those around her and catastrophes that happen on the island. And this helped me to confront the issue of good and evil and the belief in God because it's not just a logical question. How can a good God allow evil in the world? Or is he all powerful? Well, then he's not good. If he's not all powerful and he can't change it, he's not all powerful. But that's a logical question that does need to be dealt with. But so many of us experience these issues in our lives. And so I wanted to write about that. Now, I was rather surprised by some of the reactions. One of my readers, a novelist herself, said, I've never read a novel like this. And my editor said, right off the bat, after reading just a couple of pages, this is a literary novel. Well, I didn't know what they meant by the word literary novel. Well, I've discovered that in the book trade, one distinguished between literary and genre novels. Literary novels tend to focus on character development. They develop a little more slowly as far as the narrative goes. They tend to be more concerned with stylistic issues, whereas genre novels, genres would be novels of science fiction, mystery, romance. They tend to follow a certain set pattern and that moves more quickly, and they're plot driven. For example, in romance novels, the woman sees the man she wants, she falls in love, problems develop, but somehow those problems are worked out and they get happily married and live ever after that way. Now, sometimes, and I think improperly, this distinction between literary and genre novels is misused, as if literary is always superior to a genre novel. But I deny that. Science fiction, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, or mystery fiction like Dorothy Sayers and P.D. James, those are literary authors. So we can't make an absolute distinction, and certainly a qualitative distinction between these two. But it was something that interested me. Now, since I hadn't really read much contemporary Christian novels or literature, I decided I needed to do that. But I didn't want to read a Christian romance novel. I've done that a couple of those. I wanted something a little more edgy. And so I heard of Ted Dekker and his thriller novels. And so I went to the local library and picked up two novels. Now, the first novel I got was The Priest's Graveyard. And this is a fascinating novel, and I'm glad I picked this one up. It tells the story of Danny Hansen, who witnessed the brutal murder and rape of his mother and two sisters. And this angered him and set him on a quest to wreak vengeance or judge those who acted unjustly, but because of a corrupt system, weren't properly punished and never came to a recognition of the evil of their own deeds. And as the novel develops, he includes a Renee Gilmore, whom he rescues, and she becomes involved as well in his bloody actions, and they are bloody. Now, the thing is that Decker's novel is really good. It's got a great narrative with a plot twist in it. The characters are well developed, and he paints a good scene in his novels. His style is economical. He's not like a 19th century Victorian novelist who can go on and on and on. So it's really good, a good read, but it's also good for another reason. The Priest's Graveyard is good because it confronts the issue of justice and vengeance. Dekker admits in an interview that all of his characters in some way represent him. And I can see this. All of us have within us this anger that unjust deeds go unpunished, that the wicked prosper. And sometimes we feel like taking vengeance on them. And that's what's going on in Dekker's novel. Excuse me. But got to get my tea here. But what's really good about the novel is Dekker shows the psychological damage it begins to do in Danny's life, and his name Daniel, by the way, means God is my judge, in Danny's life and Renee's life. And so he says ultimately that the way is of love and mercy and grace. And that's true, although I'm not sure that he ever really resolves how that would work out with the wicked prospering if we just willingly allow that to happen and continue to practice love and mercy. What do we do about a society? But maybe that's a lot to ask of a thriller novel, and it's a good novel. The second novel I picked up is AD 30. AD 30. Now, this is a work of historical fiction. It's from the time of Christ. Dekker said that this is a novel he always wanted to write as a Christian author. And so it's really telling the life of Christ. Now, Dekker does a really good job here of pointing out the uh, perspective of a young woman who's a Bedouin. So it comes from a different perspective for us. Her name is Mavia, and she is the illegitimate daughter of a Bedouin sheik, and her father's kingdom is overtaken, and she is sent on a quest, a very dangerous quest, to try and get help to rescue the kingdom. And Dekker really describes well the Bedouin culture. He describes experiences like going through the desert in a sandstorm, palace intrigue as she meets with Herod Antipas and Phasis, his wife, and then Aretas, her father, the king of the Nabateans. So It's a good novel and a good read. And I think why it's really helpful to us theologically is it allows us to see the person of Jesus from a perspective that we normally wouldn't think of. We're so used to the story, we read it from our own perspective that sometimes we become blind to it. What Dekker does by presenting the story through this young Arab woman, and by the way, he does in both novels show a capable uh, writing portrayal of a female protagonist. Not always a gift that a male author has, but Dekker seems to have that. But anyway, so what we see is the person of Jesus through the eyes of this Bedouin woman. And we see him also through the eyes of others, like Fasa, the wife of Herod Antipas. We see her through the eyes of a couple men who accompany her with this, on this quest to protect her and enable her. So it's good for that. It lifts us out of our own perspective and we can see Jesus anew. In some ways, it reminds me of Robert Browning's poem, The Strange Medical Experience of Karshish. And in this poem, a doctor is traveling through Palestine and he meets a very old man who happens to be Lazarus, risen from the dead, and many years after he's risen from the dead. And he looks at him, and it's just incredible. It's Lazarus and his viewpoint. And Karshish, also an Arab physician, doesn't believe it, but he goes, "What if it's true?" And so Browning brings out the wonder of the incarnation. And Dekker, in his novel, wants to bring out the wonder, the mystery, etc., of the person of Christ and his impact on other people. Now, I will say that there's a chapter where he presents a lot of Jesus' teaching relevant to each person at a dinner party, and he does this with biblical quotation. I think that chapter dragged a little bit, frankly. But let me say, it's very hard. Maybe any Christian novel or any novelist would be hard pressed to present the person of Christ completely effectively in a way beyond the Gospels. But I think Dekker does a decent job, and I highly recommend the book as well. So let me ask you: are there other Ted Dekker novels that you might recommend for me to look at, or perhaps other Christian novelists, contemporary Christian novelists, that would present us with problems or issues in philosophy and theology? One caveat with Ted Dekker's novels, though, I will say that both of these have some very violent scenes, and particularly in the priest's graveyard, it's very graphic. So if you have problems with that, you might not want to read these. So let me know what you think of those. If you want to buy my novel, The Likeness of Sinful Flesh, you can get it at Amazon. It's online there, both as an ebook and a print book. Um, if you like this video, I encourage you to subscribe to it and put a like on there. Thank you for listening to this presentation.